Today on the Fulcrum Podcast, we're joined by VDA contract lobbyist Tripp Perrin to recap Virginia's General Assembly session and the legislation around workforce, insurance rules, and more that impacts dentists in Virginia and their patients. Well, Tripp, welcome. We had a short 45-day session that adjourned on time this year. Congratulations. Tripp, what were some of the themes you saw coming into the 2025 legislative session?
I think, anytime you have a short session like this, we have all 100 members of the House of Delegates who are up for re-election in the fall. And so that was certainly high motivation to get them in and out of here in a quick 46-day session. So it was nice for them to come in and get their work done and get out of here. I think certainly there was some political posturing, obviously, as there always is in a session such as this, but particularly this one, given the fact you've got a very narrowly divided House, a lot at stake in the elections come November, along with the House. Obviously, you have members of you got statewide elections as well, to include governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general up for grabs. And so I think in a lot of respects, nobody wanted to do too much to rock the boat. There was a lot of sort of quote-unquote brochure bills that probably was never going to see the light of day, but just something that people could wave around,
Sure.
both on the progressive side as well as on the conservative side, so that people could use that as they go out and get to campaigning. But I have to say, overall, all these things are fast and furious, but as far as sort of process and how things went, I think it went very well. I think there was a lot of concern that we may not have a budget, but certainly the House and Senate, in terms of their negotiating and being able to get to a place where they both agree, which is not always easy, even though they're both houses are controlled by Democrats, they were able to pretty easily send a budget to the governor that they could agree on, and now the governor's got to decide ultimately what to do with that budget.
Sure. And even with a short session, we did see a few significant wins for dentistry. And for those listening, whether you were there in person or not, you were represented by the hundreds of dentists and dental students who showed up for VDA Lobby Day, along with our lobbying team, our Director of Government Affairs, Laura Givens, who keeps it all organized
She makes it all happen
in the right direction. and yeah, so starting with insurance transaction fees. This is one of the big issues that we hear about from our members, something we've seen in the VDA's dental insurance grievance tracker. Can you talk about the process for that bill and what it means for our member dentists?
Sure. It was a bill that got introduced. We did not actually as an association, have it introduced. Some other associations did. I think the Hospital Association was involved, as well as the Medical Society. But we quickly flagged the bill as soon as it dropped. And basically what the bill does, it requires a health insurance carrier to notify a provider, i.e. a dentist, if the carrier or entity completing the transaction on behalf of the carrier uses a payment method that imposes a transaction fee or processing fee or something similar there too. So it requires notification, number one, and then number two, and probably most importantly, it also requires that carrier also provide an alternative means of payment that does not have a fee associated with it. So good win there. Certainly a good win. Obviously costs continue to go up, and our costs and their members' costs continue to go up. So a good way to keep those in check and in line.
And those are things you think about. It might be a small fee on each transaction, but over the course of a year of transactions, you're talking about it could be hundreds, thousands of dollars for a practice.
Visa and MasterCard are very well-heeled publicly traded companies for a reason. They just get a small piece of a lot of pies. So.
Workforce is on the mind of all of our member dentists. We did a lot of education with the General Assembly this year on the dynamics of Virginia's allied dental workforce shortage, ahead of a major budget year coming up next year. We also had an important bill from Senator Todd Pillion that directs the Board of Dentistry to study and make recommendations on expedited pathways to licensure by endorsement for dentists and dental hygienists. The other piece of his bill is that it directs the group to make recommendations on a pathway for qualified internationally trained dentists to practice dental hygiene under the supervision of a licensed dentist. Obviously, this passed with strong support from the VDA, Can you talk a little bit about what it means going forward and the next steps members can expect? So now we have this bill setting up a work group.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a certainly as far as I think consequential piece of legislation, it'll certainly next to the credit card deal, very important to keep the issue the workforce issue front and center directly with the Board of Dentistry and with other stakeholders, including yourselves, including the Hygiene Association. It is something that is near and dear to Senator Pillion's heart, who obviously is a pediatric dentist in Abingdon. The Dental Association cannot have a better advocate up in Richmond. As I've said before, he is somebody that is very well regarded on both sides of the aisle. He is a budget conferees, meaning he's in the room when the pie gets cut, and that's obviously very important for lots of different reasons, but particularly as it relates to dentistry. Mm-hmm. And so what will happen next, once we get through reconvene session, which is April the 2nd, the Board of Dentistry will start to put together these work groups, and probably my guess is probably have 3 or 4 different sessions to figure out what can we do to expedite licensure, both for dentists, but probably on our end, most importantly for hygienists. What are the things that we can do to increase the hygienists that practice here in Virginia, and certainly loosening some of the restrictions that we can. That may be a pathway, as well as I know we've had lots of discussion about having foreign trained dentists be able to do hygiene here in Virginia. That's certainly something we're going to take a very, very hard look at. I think as needed, I think Senator Pillion will be happy to weigh in and give his opinion and his thoughts to make sure that we have a meaningful piece of legislation or pieces of legislation next year going into the 2026 session.
Right. And when you're talking about that licensure by endorsement across state lines, that's a big chunk of our licensed workforce. When you look in the last 5 years, it's 43% of hygienists licensed were educated out of state. So having those clear pathways is important for them to have just confidence as they're coming in that they're going to be able to get to work, get licensed, and begin practicing.
Absolutely. And I think the genesis of this whole bill was the Medical Society, the Board of Medicine came out with some regs. The governor actually approved them back in December. Previously, it was, I think, medicine was either 4 or 5 of the last 6 years. Somebody had to practice in order to be able to come into Virginia by endorsement. Here with dentists, it's also 5 or 6 years. Thought is to take it and mirror what is now the Board of Medicine, which is only 2 years. And I think that'll be one of the things that we'll talk about here with the work group, whether it's 2 years or 3 years or something different, but that'll definitely be a topic of conversation. It was really sort of the genesis to get this whole thing started with Senator Pillion.
And while we're on that topic, this is a bill that didn't pass this year, but the previous year, Virginia became the 5th state to enter the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact. That Compact Commission actually met for the 3rd time, and they are setting up the framework for that, and something that we expect, hopefully, that they'll be able to begin issuing compact privileges later this year. There are now 10 states that have passed enabling legislation or part of the compact. 16 more states have pending legislation, including Maryland. We're also moving forward on that front, and hopefully, as Virginia has representation on that compact commission, we'll be able to move forward with rules that will make it much easier, or at least give people confidence that as they're coming in from out of state or looking to practice in a different state, that they'll be able to have a smooth transition to do that.
Sure. It's always, and we've talked about it forever since I've been working with you guys for 16, 17 years now. I think you've got to balance, obviously, what's in the best interest of the patient first and foremost, right? But also, as the world has changed and you have more and more, frankly, younger legislators who are sort of used to the sort of being mobile and definitely are more inclined to want to loosen some of these restrictions again, as long as it stays within the realm of keeping the patient safe. So I think we're going to continue to see a move to that as long as we're in the meetings to make sure we get it the way we want it. We'll be in good shape.
Switching to a different topic, we saw a different flavor of some of the legislation that's been introduced a number of times by Senator Bill Stanley come back this year. Can you talk about the medical malpractice cap legislation that ultimately was passed by indefinitely, and what we should expect going forward for that?
Sure, definitely. It's the primary folks who should be concerned about this, are oral surgeons, those in the association actually take health insurance because that's where the med mal cap lies. And I think ultimately the legislation did not pass. As you note, it has been introduced at least 3 of the last 4, if not 4 of the last 5, or if not 5 of the last 6 sessions. But there was an agreement back in, I believe it was 2011, between the medical society and the trial lawyers in a much different political environment that basically said we're gonna keep the med mal cap at a certain amount. I don't know the exact amount, but somewhere around 2 million, 22.5 million, something around that, and it goes up each year, a little bit each year, and said, look, we've got a 20-year agreement on this thing. We agreed we're not going to come back to lower it. We're not going to come back to increase it in the trial lawyer's case. Obviously, 14 years is a very long time, and people's memories have gotten a lot shorter, and there's more and more pressure on the trial lawyers to abandon that agreement. To their credit, they have not done that yet. Obviously, what happens is you get folks up there who've been through a horrific accident, and their damages are limited. And obviously, that tugs at the heartstrings of a lot of legislators, and understandably so. Well, at the same time, on the flip side of that, if you increase that mal cap and you don't do it in the right way, ultimately what will happen is you won't be able to get insured here. Dentists, oral surgeons will not be able to get insured. OBGYNs will not be able to get insured. And so it's striking that balance. And there was a work group last year. There will be a work group this summer, I am sure, as well, that takes a look at sort of the economics of that. Given where we are right now politically, typically Democrats ultimately are a little more with the trial lawyers than a Republican regime would be. Right now, I'd say that it looks pretty good that the Democrats could keep control of both chambers, potentially the governorship as well. And so I think there's a thought this year that, the medical community needs to get together and really figure out a solution here, assuming that the other side, the trial lawyer types, are willing to do it. Bill Stanley's a great guy from Martinsville, but he's a trial lawyer, and then you have the Speaker of the House that is also a trial lawyer, but also whose wife is a dentist, and so we'll kind of see how things shake out over the next year. But it's going to be important to be engaged in that issue as we move forward.
Moving to the budget, as we mentioned earlier, this wasn't a big budget year, but what were the big issues at play, and where do you see things going into the next year?
I think as January started, there's a lot of talk about tax. There's some tax relief in there. The governor has insisted upon tax relief. There's a lot of tax relief in his budget, which he unveiled in December. The Democrats disposed of that and did their own thing. It's one-time rebates and that sort of thing, so that it's not an ongoing revenue hit to the budget. Like you said, in Virginia, we have a 2-year budget, and so technically we don't need a new budget. We had one last year that's been approved, but there was also certainly, because Virginia has a balanced budget requirement in its constitution, we've very well managed state fiscally. We had a surplus, and so they were able to do some things relative to rebates, increase some spending, particularly in K-12 was a big area of increased spending. We did not get an increase this year, but certainly we're not hit with any decrease in our rates. Of course, we had 30% 2 years ago and 3% last year. On the Medicaid front, very few, and I'm trying to remember if any providers actually this year, the HHR, Health and Human Resources, was not something that neither the House nor the Senate really focused on. I think right now the thing they're going to need to watch is there's been a special committee formed by the Speaker to take a look at the impact of the federal cuts that are happening. Virginia is, I believe, the state that is most reliant upon federal workers. And so the layoffs and the uncertainty can have a tremendous impact on our ultimate budget number and revenue number to project. And so they will be coming back here, even if it's not in a formal session, although there may be one of those, to take a look at Medicaid. There's some concern about Medicaid cuts, both from a reimbursement perspective, but also in terms of just the sheer numbers of people that are on Medicaid. We have some triggers in our Medicaid language here in Virginia that could be problematic. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think that from a political standpoint, the Democrats are going to want to use that in the fall to to beat up on the Republicans. And so you've got the political play of it also. But I think there's a real play in terms of what could potentially be the impact of the budget moving forward.
That's right. I think Virginia is one of, I believe, 9 states that have that trigger law. And if anything is cut, that does put us in a position where we need to make some hard decisions.
Yeah, basically, for those listening, in Virginia, they baked a 90-10 rule into the Virginia law, which basically says if the federal government reimburses anything less than 90%, if it gets below 90%, Virginia's footing the bill for more than 10% of it, of the Medicaid expansion cost, then automatically a significant hundreds of thousands of people get kicked off the Medicaid rolls. Right. So there's a lot of concern about that and what would happen and how do you go about fixing it.
We touched on Lobby Day, but can you talk about how important it is right now to reach out to legislators, thank them for where they have helped, engage, build relationships with them in the sort of off season outside of the General Assembly session?
Yeah, well, it's a great point, and Laura's done a great job through the years of making sure that all of our legislators in the House and the Senate have a dentist that they're somehow connected to. Hopefully, in most cases, it's actually their provider. I always laugh and tell people you've got a lot of leverage when you've got a sharp object in somebody's mouth. But seriously, I think it's very important that we continue to do that and really double down to make sure, particularly new folks that have not been in the legislature for a while, or folks that for some reason we don't have a contact dentist for, that we spend some time. And I've told my team we're going to spend some time making sure that we fill any of those gaps in. Because, look, you can't beat home cooking. My job is to figure out what the legislative process is and what the best path to winning ultimately is. But at the end of the day, you can't beat home cooking in this business. You can't beat somebody from home walking through the door in a friendly face and sitting down. And obviously somebody that's truly an expert in the field. I'm not an expert in the field. The team's not an expert in the field. But the membership here are the experts. They're ones in the white coat that will sit down and actually explain the issue in a very nonpartisan way. So it can't express how powerful that is over time.
Laura, who's actually in this room, she does an amazing job of keeping our member dentists informed on all of the things that relate directly to oral health care. But just as you're talking about, like, how do you get involved with your local delegate, local state senator, getting on their mailing list, their constituent list, making sure you hear what they're focused on, finding opportunities to go to events, fundraisers with them, engaging in the VDA PAC, which helps to build relationships with those legislators and make sure that those legislators have all of those things can have an impact. And
especially the PAC.
Especially the PAC.
Participating in the PAC.
But so much of it comes down to relationships, having trust, and that takes time.
It does. It's a great point. I always tell people, lobbyists particularly that are trying to break into this, but you can't force relationships. If you do, everybody sees it. It's very transparent, and you can't. It takes years to build, but once you do, right, and you've been credible, you've told the truth, you've given folks the information that they've asked for. I always tell people when we go in on an issue, we give them both sides. We try very hard to do that. Say, look, here's what we're telling you. Here's what the other side's going to tell you, and just being dead honest with them so that they can make a good decision for themselves, for their constituents, and for the state, and hopefully, 8 times out of 10 anyway, they're on our side and not on the others' side.
Right. Tripp, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to provide this update for our members. If you'd like to stay up to date on the latest action alerts, what's going on at the VDA, please text VDA to 52886. That's VDA to 52886. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Fulcrum Podcast. Please send your comments and ideas to the Fulcrum Podcast at vadental.org. See today's show notes for links to the legislation we discussed and the VDA's advocacy resources. Thank you.